Well, Sherwin joins us live now from UN headquarters in New York. Sherwin, thank you as always. So it sounds like getting aid in will be complicated for that peace summit to make a real difference. That will be hard. Let's start with the aid. What is the UN saying about when it's likely to get into Gaza, limited as it might be at this stage?
A fluid situation, Francis. Maybe tomorrow, but nothing is a certainty. I'll read you a little bit of what the Secretary General said at the Rafah border crossing earlier today. We absolutely need to move trucks in as quickly as possible, as many as possible from Egypt into Gaza. There are agreements in principle between Egypt and Israel in that regard, but we need to overcome the conditionalities and the obstacles that still exist. Of course, you know what those obstacles are. Israel and the United States do not want those aid deliveries to get into the hands of Hamas. Hamas, of course, is recognized by Israel and the United States and many European countries as a terrorist organization, but they are also the governing authority in the enclave of Gaza. The Secretary General, Francis, talked about the need for this not to be a one-shot operation. You'll remember President Biden speaking in Tel Aviv earlier this week talked about only getting 20 trucks in. The World Health Organization's Michael Ryan saying that would just be a drop in the ocean, and they're hoping that a trickle will become a river flow of aid into Gaza, but that certainly is not a certainty. The Secretary General acknowledging, Francis, that there needs to be verification of these goods that are going into Gaza. The verification needs to be serious, but it also needs to be expedited and practical. So essentially what you have right now is a process of logistics. The trucks are piling up outside of Rafah on Egypt's side. They need to get into Gaza. They need to be checked, inspected. And then the assurances that it will not reach into the hands of Gazan authorities, essentially Hamas, is the complexity that we are faced with here. And once they then cross the border, there are bombs have been falling in this enclave. Roads are damaged. Infrastructure is damaged. How are those trucks going to move through this enclave given the destruction and devastation that has been wrought by those Israeli airstrikes? So this is a complicated endeavor to get things from A to B, from B to C, from C to D, and so forth. And that is the situation we are grappling with, while those shortages of fuel, water, food, medical supplies are only being exasperated and exacerbated by this delay.
Yeah, people just hoping and waiting, I'm sure, inside. Thank you for that. Let's look at the Cairo Peace Summit. You said no confirmation about the US, but we've seen a number of delegates confirming. South Africa, of course, many from the Arab world, European nations, Japan. What's the early read? What can a summit of this practically deliver, given the situation on the ground?
Well, they're calling it a hastily organized summit. I mean, 24 hours ago, we didn't know that there was a Cairo Peace Summit. And so it's a very fluid situation. We don't know what the agenda is for this meeting. They're calling it a peace summit. But what are the low-hanging fruit here? Is this a peace summit that is going to put pressure on parties to get humanitarian aid in? That seems to be a reasonable assumption. But in terms of a peace between Hamas and Israel in the short term, we have a build-up of Israeli troops on the border with Gaza. You have several ministers from Israel's war cabinet indicating that a ground invasion is imminent. The Israeli authorities have been clear that they want to exact revenge on Hamas for the atrocity that was perpetrated against Israelis on October 7th. So, it's a very, very complex situation where we really don't know. Are they going to deal with long-standing issues in relation to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, where we know that direct negotiations between the two parties has been the mantra of the international community now for decades? I mean, often we talk about what is the role of the UN Security Council in that regard, and countries are very clear that peace will not be negotiated in that organ of the United Nations. It has to be between the two parties. So Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will be there, but who will be representing the Israeli side? Who will be representing the Gazan authorities, essentially Hamas? So these are the many questions that people like ourselves covering this, we simply do not know. Normally you have Sherpas before a meeting of this nature, when leaders convene in this nature. What are the Sherpas saying about this? Who are the Sherpas? Too many questions here, Francis. So in terms of the short term, one expects this to be a peace summit that will focus in the main on humanitarian aspects, but of course maybe creating an avenue, a pathway towards the bigger issues in terms of the long-standing Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and maybe a pathway towards direct negotiations. But that's speculation for now.